And the first place is taken by Neogene Technological University of Malaysia. Guys, congratulations. So you see, oh yeah, I see, oh, yeah, I hear some applause. That's great, right? You did great. Okay, so comparing to other teams, you did absolutely great. So we see that the standings didn't actually change after the last shot. Actually, even at the last shot, you had all your chances to change your tournament standings. But as a matter of fact, the last shot was the best for our leader. You can see this 7.5. That is actually the best number, not only for you, but for all the teams, the way I see it, right? Yeah, I think I'm right. So, guys, you did great. So you didn't let anyone to take your first place. There was not many drama around, how our tournament was going on. So as a matter of fact, the first place was taken by Carbon initially, Petro Vietnam. And I believe that after 2 shots, Carbon was still at the first place. But after shot number 3 today, the situation changed and Neogene took the first place and didn't let anyone take it afterwards. And I believe that Devon and Paleogene were taken the 3rd and the 4th place right after the first shot, and these places didn't change for them during the whole tournament. The way I see it from the table, right? Yeah, I think it's right. Okay, I think that there was a little downturn for the Paleogene, right? So I think something has happened to this team. After shot number 1, where I saw some activity from you, I think we lost you for some time, right? And then in the last shot, I see some activity from you finally. So it seems like something happened to you guys, right? Maybe you were really upset about your result. I mean, what happened? Okay, we'll have some time for Q&A a little later. Now I think it is the right time to, okay, let me do this. Okay. I think it's right about time to look into your statistics, the statistics of your performance. So this is the second part of our debriefing, which we call CAS, which is Consolidated Activity Statistics. So we have an automatically generated table of main metrics. There's 81 of them, I believe, which are showing your performance during this tournament. And in this table, you will be compared to the reference case scenario. So I would like to remind you that you competed with 3 teams. One of them was a reference case scenario, which is like the scenario which is close to the best scenario possible. So we may call it also like ideal scenario. And we take it as 100%. So you can compare your results to the 100% that is technically reachable during this tournament on this asset and given 5 shots. Also, there were 2 teams. One team is like a very lazy team, which we call NFA, no further activities. So these guys just don't do anything. They save all the money and they actually do nothing. So if we haven't touched this field at all, we would get 13.4%. So I'm very sorry to see that one of our team, the Paleogene, actually followed, well, mostly followed this scenario, right? And you get a little less than NFA. Also, we had another team, which is called Booster. So Booster is like a scenario where we use a robot. And this robot, in fact, doesn't analyze any data. All the money that he has, he spends on drilling and workovers on producers to increase production and stimulate them. He set the targets to the maximum and again, doesn't use any surveillance, doesn't analyze any of historical data, nothing. So this robot gets about 27% on this asset. So unfortunately, guys, all of your teams are a little behind this robot. Okay, something to think about. Okay, so I think we're done with this table. Again, congratulations to the leaders. And now to the also fun part as to me, and it is a consolidated activity statistics. So this is a CAS table, the final table. Here you can see the 81 metrics. I think we're going to run quite fast through it because most of them are unfilled now. And we have a reference case scenario here. So whenever you see some numbers in your columns, you should probably compare them not only to your fellow teammates and other teams, but to the reference case scenario. So whenever you see a number here, it means that if your number dramatically differs from the number in the reference case scenarios, then probably something is wrong with your strategy, right? So, well, judging by the result, we may probably see that, well, yeah, that's probably something wrong with the strategy, right? Okay, now let's see first rows of this table. So here go the final standings. You've already seen it. Now we see the NPV. So if we take the reference case NPV as 100%, this is the NPV that you get. So actually, these places were assigned to you judging by this NPV. So again, congratulations to the Neogen. Then we have this PI. So PI is a profitability index. And PI not only depends on how much you have earned, but it also depends on how efficiently did you place your money. And surprisingly, the paleo gene, who barely barely performs any activities, but these little activities were in fact productive. So they got a huge PI. But again, the NPV was very, very low for the paleo gene. So it's like 1.5 times less than for our leader, and well, approximately 9 times less than the reference case scenario. So guys, probably if you had more time and you put more effort into it, then you could probably win this tournament. All right. The next index is NPV by budgets. So it actually shows you how efficiently did you place the budget that you had. Because I think you noticed that whoever made the best shot got the most money for the second shot. So your budget always depended on your results on the previous shot. So it may seem a little unfair because whoever does the best first shot get the most chances. But as you see now, we had Carbon on the first place after the first shot. And eventually the Neogen ended up a winner of the tournament. So probably it's not that unfair. But in order to better judge you on how you spent your budget, we use this index, NPV by budget. But here we have no surprises, and we see that the teams are distributed along these columns in the same order as they came in our tournament. So 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, let's move on. Here you can see the budget of the teams. So of course, the reference case scenarios, they made very good shots and they got a lot more money for the next shots. And of course, their budget is much higher than yours. So, well, approximately 3 times higher, as you can see. So you only get from 31 to 35% of the budget of the reference case scenario. But still, of course, our winner, they had slightly more money. Carbon and Devon had approximately the same, just a little behind the winner, and the Paleogene, they had the least budget in the tournament. Okay, Now let's see how you spent this budget. Yeah, that's really interesting. That shows, a hint on your strategies. And let's see. Well, okay, let's start from the end. So we have the Pelagian, and this team didn't drill like at all. So in fact, all the teams have drilled some wells, but for the Pelagian. And you see that Carbon and Devon, they spent, well, approximately half of their money on drilling, producing wells. Neogen had spent like 20% of the money on drilling. And none of the teams actually drilled injectors. Yeah, that's kind of sad, guys, because, we're in water flood projects here. You see that the reservoir is severely depleted. I mean, the reservoir pressure now is way lower than it was initially when we started developing the reservoir. So it's obviously there's something wrong with the injection system. We need more water placed into the right place into the reservoir. But how we're supposed to do it without drilling new injectors, guys? If you take a look at the strategy of the reference case scenario, you can see that only 1/3 of the money they spent on drilling producers, which is also, of course, important because you need to produce oil also. But actually, even more than that, even more money they spent on drilling injector wells. And it is a good point because they needed to increase the reservoir pressure and inject more water into this field. Unfortunately, none of you did this. So this is one of the key reasons why the final results, your final percentage is not looking great, I would say. Okay. So this is to the drilling strategy. No one spent any money on surface facilities, and it's okay because you didn't need to do this. We see that the reference case scenario didn't spend any money on this as well. Then to the fracturing. Also, surprisingly, you spent very, very little money on fracturing your wells. So just, 1 to 3%, while you can see that the reference case scenario spent 15% of their budget on fracturing the wells. So again, maybe, I don't know, for some reason maybe you don't believe in the fracturing, but I believe that I saw some of the teams performing the fractures, and the results of the fracturing jobs were amazing, but you didn't go on, you didn't proceed with that, and you just didn't do any other fracturing at all. And that is kind of puzzling me, okay? Maybe we will have some time to discuss it later. Okay. Next, workovers on producers. And that is where you spend most of your money, right? A lot of money was spent on it. So you can see that the winning team spent 17% on it. About 20% was spent by Carbon and Paleogene, and nearly 40% of all the money was spent on producers' workovers by Devon. So you can see in the first row, reference case scenario, first column, right, that in fact, you should have spent only 3 or 4% of money on this. Because, the channelings in your producers and the high skin of your producers is actually not the worst problem of this field. And it actually doesn't call for this, I mean, this huge money spending. Okay. Next, the workovers on injectors. And let's pay attention on what reference case scenario did. They actually spent more money on workovers on injectors than on producers. But I see that, for example, Carbon didn't perform any workovers on injectors like at all. And yeah, that is one of your problems. So if you saw that you need to fix some of your injectors, then you could probably take the first place after all. The same thing I see with the Paleogene. They didn't spend, well, they didn't spend a lot, like at all, but specifically on workovers and injectors, they only spend like 1.5%. And then we see Devon and Neogene, who spend a lot on this. And that is probably because you saw that you fix the well, then you increase the rate, and then you see another channeling and you fix the well again. Probably it was like this. But still, that's in fact, it's good that you spend a lot of money on workovers and injectors because here it was needed. Okay. The next row, the well survey. So you see that the reference case scenario spent about 5% of their money on field surveillance. And we have a team called Devon who doesn't believe in field development surveillance at all. So you didn't do anything for surveillance. That's, well, quite impressive. Okay. We have the Paleogene who spent actually the right amount of money on surveillance. I'm not sure how it helps you because I see that you spent all your money on production logging on producers. So, well, probably not the best tactics. Also, we have the Carbon, who spent twice as much money as Paleogene on the very same thing, right? Production logging on producers. Again, comparing to the reference case scenario, out of this 5%, which they spend on surveillance, only 3 go to production logging on producers. Okay. And also we have Neogene, the only team which spent some money on well testing. So probably you took some reservoir pressure samples. That's very good for you. You also spent a lot of money on production logging, but you are the only team who spent some money on production logging in injectors. And that is, again, very good. So it's not the first time that I noticed that the team which spends the most money on surveillance actually wins the tournament. Yeah, so sometimes it's, the other way, but in this session, you can see it with your own eyes. So who knows more about the reservoir finally gets the best result. Okay, so that was about the first part of our statistics, about our economical indicators and the statistics of our budgeting. The last thing I want to say is that we have very different strategies on how to spend money. So if I sum the spendings of the Carbon, I see that they spend 99+% of their budgets. Same thing for Devon, 99+%. But as to our winner, the Neogene, if I sum all these rows, I will only have 70%. So guys, you left 30% of your money. You saved it. Well, you probably thought that you could transfer it into your bank account, right? Yeah, okay, so unfortunately not going to happen. But again, your team ended up as being the most efficient team in this tournament, right? To buy Bitcoin, very nice, very nice. Okay, okay, maybe, okay. Maybe the efficient investment right now. Not sure, but maybe. Okay, but you see that in fact, you were the most efficient team in this tournament. Ended up like the most efficient team. So you knew how to invest your money. Well, you probably did. And if you knew how to invest it, why leave the money untouched? Just invest everything. So, for example, the reference case scenario, they spent every dime into the reservoir developments. Because, again, producing oil is a very, very profitable business, guys. And it means that if you have any money, you should invest it. And especially if you have a field like this, which, hides a lot of opportunities to increase the oil production. Okay. And as to the our last team, the Paleogene, you can see that they only spend like 35% of their budget. So I believe there was this long downturn for them. I don't know, they didn't have the time or the motivation, right? So they practically left it like no further activities. And they only spent like 1/3 of their money that could probably that could probably spend. So that said, guys, as a matter of fact, I believe you saved a lot of money up to the last shot. And in shot number 5, you had enough money to drill several wells. I think that could actually take you to the first place. But well, anyway, it happened as it happened. Let's move on. And now we're going to talk about the producing wells and how did you produce. Okay, so this block is for your production. You can see that the oil recovery factor for the reference case scenario is 30. It's 30%. So this is, well, probably the best that you can reach in this field. So what is the oil recovery factor? You probably noticed that you ended up your tournament in a virtual time about 2023, right, or 25. So we take your field as it is, and then we calculate what would happen to it up to the year 2100, right? So what will happen in another 80 years? How much oil will you eventually produce from the field? So actually, this indicates how good was the water flood system that you built. How efficient was your field when you left it, when the tournament ended. And here you can say you can see that comparing to the reference case scenario, you are like 2/3 effective, like 66% in average effective. So instead of 30, in average, you only get 20% of recovery. All right, something to think about. Also, you may see that the teams are arranged in the same order as they came in the tournament, right? So the Neogen have the most recovery factor, the Pelagian unfortunately have the least. Now to the oil production. Also, no surprises here. So the winner produced the most oil. Sometimes it is not this way, because sometimes the team could produce more oil, but unfortunately they produce it closer to the end of the tournament. So only to the shots on 3 and 4, they start to understand what to do. They produce a lot of oil, but it's too late, because due to the economical model that we use, due to the inflation, unfortunately, your money are less and less valuable with years. And but here we see the straightforward picture, the most and the least. So in average, you produced about 20% of oil of the reference case scenario, which is, well, not much, I would say. Now let's see where did you produce from. So cumulative oil production on new wells, you can see in this this row. So unfortunately, none of the teams were even close to the reference case scenario. But I think we need to mark the carbon team, who actually produced the most from the new wells. So you were the most successful drillers, I would say. Actually, you drilled most of the wells, more than every team, and you produced a lot from these wells. Neogen and Devon, they produced like twice as less. Actually, these results are, I would say, comparable. And the Speleogene, who didn't drill at all, so they didn't produce from any new wells, as they didn't have any. All right. Also, we see that one of the producers was converted from injection by Devon, right? No. Let me see. Two producers were converted, right? Two producers were converted back from injection, and you didn't really benefit from it. The way I see it, you barely produced at all from these wells, right? So they probably failed you. Okay, so we see that the reference case scenario didn't convert any injectors back into production, so probably not a good idea for this asset. Okay. Now to the old wells. So why did Neogen win after all? That's because they produced the most from the old wells. So here you can see that the difference between the production of oil wells between Neogen and carbon is higher than the difference in production from new wells. So here is where you won, guys. You managed to create more efficient water flood system than your mates, and you won after all. So unfortunately, again, comparing to the reference case scenario, doesn't look very good. It's like three and a half times less, but still amongst your competitors, you guys are the best. Then comparing carbon, Devon, Paleogene, you can see that the carbon actually produced nearly the same amount of oil from the existing wells as the Paleogene, and the Devon produced more. But where you lost, guys, Devon, is in production from your new wells. So if your drilling would be more successful, then probably you would end up, well, at least in a second place. Okay, let's go on. As to the liquid production, we may see that the numbers are more or less the same for neogen and carbon. Also, well, dramatically less than the reference case scenario, but still. Then we have a little less liquid production for Devon and dramatically less production for Paleogene. So this is what I see. And out of this liquid, we see different water cuts. So as a matter of fact, the water cut is very close, but the Devon has the highest water cut by the end of this session amongst all the teams. And as a matter of fact, all the teams have higher water cut than the reference case scenario, like 5% higher, which in fact means that it's like 16 or 17% less oil in your liquid. Yeah, not looking great. Now to the new challenge on producers. Well, we warned you that if you play hard with your production targets, you might create new channels. And I think that Neogene and Paleogene, they took it seriously, right? And they were very careful, actually more careful than the reference case scenario. So they probably were too careful, but still they get less new channelings and like 2 times less than carbon and Devon. And as to the well productivity index, you can see that the productivity index for the carbon was the highest. So you managed to create a system of the most productive wells. Still less productive than for the reference case scenario, of course, but way higher than, for example, the Neogene, who is the winner today. So Neogene, as a matter of fact, the productivity of your producers was the worst in the tournament, but still you won. How? And we have several other rows which would explain us how. And it is pressure. So now let's see. We had the initial pressure at the end of the session about 1400 psi, 14,500 psi. That's the reservoir pressure around your producing wells. So you can see that the reference case scenario managed to increase this pressure. As a matter of fact, all of the teams in average have decreased this pressure. But the team who eventually had a highest reservoir pressure around producing wells was the Neogene. And the closest competitor had the lowest reservoir pressure around producers. Maybe you see now what happened, right? So the Neogene eventually put more efforts into the water flood, into the right injection. And that is what got them to the first place. As to the bottom hole pressure, you see that the Neogene got the lowest bottom hole pressure amongst all the teams. And as a matter of fact, the reference case scenario has even lower pressure. So I think you didn't even risk too much, and you could even lower it down. And the most careful teams were Devon and Paleogene. But if you look at the next row, you will see the value of the drawdown. Scared to reach the bubble point. Yeah, understand. Yeah, fully understand. But we should probably see. Yeah. I know. Yeah, that actually could be a problem. But I think if you look closely on your PVT properties, you would see that there is no major problem with the gas. And the GOR is not very high. And we did not have any constraint on gas production. So probably you should give it a little more risk. But anyway, whoever did this, and it was Neogen, they finally won, because you see that the drawdown on their producers was dramatically higher than for each other team. So 1.5, maybe twice as high than from other teams. And that is what gives them the first place. That is what makes them produce the most out from both existing and new wells. Okay. Now let's see on the drilling. So the teams drilled several producers, all but the Pelagian. So the Pelagian was like a special team. They didn't drill at all, but they converted a couple of wells back from injection. So if we see the row number 39, you see that it didn't work out fine for them, unfortunately. Number 40. So the total initial oil rate on these two converted well was only like, what, 4 barrels per day. Yeah, doesn't look like the successful decision, but still. Also, we have Carbon and Devon, who had each of them had 6 new producers, but again, Devon converted a couple of wells back into production from injection. So again, probably not a good idea for this particular asset. Carbon has fairly drilled 6 wells, and the Neogen drilled 2. So let's see which were these wells. So Devon was the only team who managed to drill a horizontal, and it was a horizontal with a multi-stage fracturing. Well, good for you. And one of the wells for Neogen and the Devon were fractured. That's probably also very good. But looking at the initial production rate of the well that you drill, you can see that it was, well, approximately the same. And again, it was not really looking good comparing to the reference case scenario. So probably all of your wells, guys, were not as successful as you were expecting them to be. So now you see that, okay, the initial rate was more or less the same. And the next row will show you the total initial production rate of your new wells. Well, looks more or less okay. But here's an interesting thing. You can see that the Devon had like twice as high initial production rates for the new wells. But in the end, if we go back to this row, you see that cumulative production from the new wells, they had lower than Neogen. You see? So it means that, well, probably you drilled, well, successfully, but you didn't manage to create a right water flood system to support the pressure around your new wells. And that is probably where you lost. Okay, let's move on. So as to the fractures on the new existing producers, you see that the reference case scenario made 18 fractures, 18 frac jobs. Okay, so this is where you probably didn't work enough, didn't find the right candidates. I don't know, because again, I believe that I saw some teams making a successful frac and then stop. I don't know why, guys, but probably didn't work out for you well. So 1, 2, 3 fracs. Well, Carbon, well, probably good for you. I'm not sure about the results, but still not enough. then to the stimulations of producers. So as we saw from the open map review, this field has a couple of producers with high skin, which should be stimulated, should have been stimulated, right? And well, maybe some of the teams actually found these producers and stimulated them. Well, I hope so. But as for the Devon, guys, you stimulate a lot. I think you stimulate a lot more than you had to. So you know, waste a lot of money on this. And I'm not sure about the result because, again, the economical stimulations were only 2. Okay. Now let's go to the perforations. So we had some perf jobs to do, and you actually made right about 10 for neogen and pelagian and 20 for carbon and devon. So I believe the right number is about 10 here. So yeah, I think the carbon and devon, you a little bit extended your perforation activity. Also, I noticed that some of the teams would accidentally shut off the whole well and then they had to perforate it again. Maybe that is what your problem was. Okay. But yeah, that was money not well spent, probably. Okay. Okay, now let's move on. Let's see how you work with your production targets. So you see in this row several numbers. So the first number is a total number of your target adjustments. You can see that the reference case scenario actually adjusted the rate on producers 110 times. So 82 of them was up, so we increased production, and 28 was down. So now you can compare your numbers with the reference case scenario. So we see that the paleogene didn't work a lot with the flow rates. Yeah, probably because of this downturn that they had, but unfortunately, they also mostly decrease the rate. That is probably not what you want to do when you want to produce more oil and get the best economical result. Why would you decrease the rate in most of your wells, guys? Actually, the same story I see with the Devon and the carbon. Guys, you see, you mostly decrease the rate on your wells. While our winner today, the neogen, they still mostly increase the rate, which is right, judging by the reference case scenario. Okay, and then as to the well testing, we see 8 formation pressure tests from the neogen. Thank you very much, guys. Really appreciate it because we believe in that the right surveillance will give you the best result, which actually happened today. Unfortunately, other teams and other types of tests were not that popular during this session. As to the production logging, I see some teams which didn't take them at all, and most of the teams only produced the production logging. Most of them only took the noise logging, and I think that is probably right, because during the PLT, you want to know what's going on behind the casing. If you want to understand if you do or if you do not have a cross flow, you call for the noise logging. All right, okay. Maybe a little bit too much, judging again by the reference case scenario, but still, well, you spent some money on surveillance, and that is probably good. Okay, now the next block is going to be shorter, and it is a block dedicated to your injection system. So we have several indicators of how efficient was your injection system, and the first of them is RIR, which is repressurization index, excuse me, repressurization injection index. Yes, ratio. Yeah, sorry, guys. So what it means, so you inject some water into your injection wells, and you have the pressure around your producers. So if you inject into the right place, then probably the pressure around your producers would increase. If you do not, it would decrease. So it is a very simple indicator. It is the subtraction. No, that's actually, you have to divide your pressure increase around producing wells by the amount of your total injection. And that's how you get this index. So it means that the reference case scenario here increased the pressure around the producers. And none of the teams today managed to do this. So I would specifically mark the D1 because they managed not to decrease the pressure. So their ratio is strictly 0. So by the end of the tournament, they had the same pressure around their producing wells, which is, well, at least it's not bad. But other teams, guys, unfortunately, you depleted your fields. And if we look further on the row 56, and you can see here the voidage replacement ratio, you see that actually you injected a lot more than you produced, but still your field has been depleted. And that is probably a problem with conformance in your injection wells. So probably you should know better where to inject it and make it more efficient. Okay, the row 53, let's go back, is PIR, which is production injection ratio. Very, very simple indicator. So here it shows how much oil do you get from injecting 1 cubic or meter of water, right? Or 1 barrel of water. Okay. So we see that the reference case scenario injects 3 barrels of water and gets 1 barrel of oil. And for you guys, in order to get 1 barrel of oil, you have to inject, well, from 5 to 7 barrels of water. So it marks your water flood as much less efficient than for the reference case scenario. The new challenge on injectors, you see that the reference case scenario was not very careful, and they actually made 17 new channels. And Neogene was close to them, 15 new channels for you guys. Actually, Carbon was like the most careful team here. Also, D1 and Paleogene, guys, well, you did great, but unfortunately didn't help you much. So you saw from the open map review that most of your injection wells already had some channels, and you had to fix it. Probably you did not. So even without new channels, you weren't able to inject your water into the right place. So as to the cumulative water injection, you can see that all the teams didn't manage to inject even close to the reference case scenario, but the teams who injected the most were Carbon and D1. So, all right, guys, that could have been good if this water was going into the right place. The Paleogene was the team who injected the least water here, but as they produced the least, the voidage replacement ratio was the highest. Okay, unfortunately, it didn't help them as well. So you see, they injected 60% more than they did produce, but still they depleted the field a little. Yeah. So this is a situation like screams about the problems with your injection wells. Okay, let's move on. So the injectivity index was very different for the teams. Again, that is where our winners had some problems. So you see your injectivity index was the least out of all the teams, like twice as less as for the Carbon. But now let's see what's again with the pressure. So how did you manage to inject approximately the same amount of water? And the answer is, again, the pressure. So out of all teams, you managed to increase formation pressure around your injection wells, but also you got the highest bottom hole pressure, which gives you the highest drawdown on your injection wells. Actually, it's 2 times higher than for the reference case scenario. So you did really try to inject the water there, and probably you succeeded in a way. So we injected like at twice higher drawdown than other teams. And that is what allowed you to inject as much water as them with higher injectivity index. Now, as to the new injectors, unfortunately, guys, none of you drilled a single injector. And yeah, that is a really sad, because you see that the reference case scenario drilled 7 new injectors. 7. And also they converted 6 wells into injection. So we see that the Devon tried to convert. They probably succeeded. They converted 4 wells. Pelagian only converted 1 well. But again, the total water injection on new wells doesn't even closely compare to the reference case scenario. So you can see that reference case, these guys, they injected like 7 times more water in new wells than the best of the teams, which is Devon. So guys, probably here is, well, again, something to think about. I mean, water flood project, depleted field, and no new injectors. Oh, come on, really? Okay, now as to the fracturing on injectors, none of the teams does it. And that's, again, very sad, because it affects your injectivity index. You see that the injectivity index of the reference case scenario was twice as high as any team. And that is due to this fracturing jobs. Of course, well, doesn't look good, guys. This row doesn't look good. So none of the injectors called for the stimulation, and no one did it. It's fine. You found several wells to add perf to, several injectors like Neogen, Devon. Well, right, guys, great. But the way I see it, the reference case didn't do it, so probably there was no need to do it. But again, experiment, good. That's better than not to do anything, right? You should probably try and then see, maybe it would work for you. As to the water shutoffs, which is a very important part of it, so you saw there was a whole lot of channeling in injector wells, and probably Neogen found this out and they tried to block it. So guys, good for you. Unfortunately, none of other teams did it, but I think that is probably, again, one of the reasons why you are in the first place today. So you performed 12 water shutoffs, a little more than you should have, but still you did some. And then as to the rate adjustments, so guys, you see that the targets for the injectors also, you barely worked with your injectors at all. So yeah, you know, suspiciously less active you were with your injectors. Well, maybe that was because you had less injectors that you should have had. But I mean, like 9 activities with injection targets doesn't look good. 74 for the reference case scenario and 25 for our leader, the Neogen. And still, I see that you mostly decrease the injectivity. And again, guys, doesn't look good. So probably you should rather increase it more in order to inject more and thus produce more. And the last thing I want to say is about your surveillance for your injection well. This actually, guys, that gives me thrills. Why do you hate your injectors so much? Do you really think you don't need to know anything about your injection? About what is the pressure around your injection? Where do you inject the water? The only team who spent some money on injectors surveillance is our winner Neogen today. And even you guys, you only performed 1 production logging in the well. Do you really think it's enough? Okay. Okay, so, well, as a matter of fact, this is a global trend. Unfortunately, most of the teams in the world, they underestimate the value of surveillance in injectors, even on water flood projects where actually it's very important. So here, you guys, I think you follow the main trend. But maybe, I believe, maybe I hope that's what you saw today, what you saw, especially during this debriefing, will give you a couple of thoughts. and maybe you will reconsider your view of reservoir development. And well, mostly I hope that this exercise was fun, productive, insightful, and you had a great team building. Because another goal of the PetroCup is to make each team member understand what the next guy is doing and why is it important. So, you know, the practice, it would come later. So the more you practice, the better result you will get. And that's totally fine. But the main principle is to work together to perfectly understand the contribution of each team member, each role in your team, like geologist, petrophysicist, log analyst, well tester, and so on and so on. And always see the big picture and which part of the knowledge would contribute into the total result. Because I mean, you guys are still young and you have, you know, a long way ahead of you. And I'm sure you will all be very successful. But the ones who are able to understand the big picture, who can understand their place in the whole workflow, and they know which are the bricks which put together the wall of the final result. So these guys will succeed the most. All right, guys, so this is probably it from me. Thank you very much.